towards constructive building, but it's looking backwards, trying to maintain advantage. Any sports fan, not even talking about professionals in sports, in hockey, in all types of martial arts, they know that trying to simply maintain the advantage is always a losing game. Going back to the dialectics of history, we can say that parallel existence of conflict potential and the strive towards harmony is naturally unsustainable. The contradiction of the era, sooner or later, will come to a head through synthesis and a transition to a new quality. When we enter this new phase of development, building of new global architecture, it's important for all of us not to repeat the mistakes of the end of the past century. As I've said before, back then, West tried to impose on everyone there, I think, deeply amoral model of exiting the Cold War, brought new conflicts. The emerging multipolar world, there should be countries and nations that feel that they've lost. No one should feel discriminated against and humiliated. Only with that we can ensure just and safe development. The strive towards cooperation and interaction is now, without doubt, gaining the upper hand, overcoming most acute situations. We can boldly say that it is indeed the international mainstream and the course of events. Naturally, being at ground zero of tectonic shifts caused by sea changes in the global system, it's hard to forecast the future. But as we know, the general direction of change from hegemony to the complex world of multilateral cooperation, we can try to draw certain outlines of the future. Speaking at the Valdai Forum last year, I've spoken about 6 principles that we believe should be the foundation for relations at a new historical stage. The events and the time that has passed since then, I believe, only confirmed that the proposed notions were both justified and well-founded. I will try to build on them. Number 1, openness towards cooperation is a crucial value for an overwhelming majority of countries and nations. Attempts to build artificial barriers are vicious not only through the fact that they stand in the way of normal and beneficial economic development for everyone. Disconnection of ties is especially dangerous during natural disasters and social and political shocks, which is unfortunately the way of life. The situations are unacceptable, like the situation that happened after the catastrophic earthquake in Asia Minor. For purely political reasons, aid was blocked towards the nation of Syria. Some of its regions were tremendously affected by the natural phenomenon. In such examples, when egotistical, myopic interests stand in the way of overall prosperity are not unique. Very free environment that I spoke about last year is key not only to economic prosperity, but also to satisfying acute humanitarian needs. And amid new challenges, among them are the consequences rapid growth of technologies, it's imperative that humanity pulls their intellectual efforts together.
It's telling that today openness is currently mostly being opposed by those who just recently, yesterday, as it were, used to call themselves its greatest champions. Today, the very same forces and people are trying to instrumentalize restrictions to exert pressure on those who think differently. But this is not going to work due to the very same reason. An overwhelming world majority favors openness without any politicization. Second, we've always spoken about world diversity as a sine qua non to ensure its stability. It might seem like a paradox. For the more mixed the world is, the more complicated it is to build a single framework. And of course, universal norms should be of help. Could they help that? There's no denying it. It is a difficult task. But first, it shouldn't come to a point when a model of a single country or a relatively small part of humanity is taken as something universal and imposed on all the rest. Secondly, no conventional or be quite democratically developed code cannot be perceived and prescribed as a directive and irrefutable truth. once and for all, because the international community is a living organism whose worth and uniqueness consist in its civilizational diversity, whereas the international law is an outcome of agreements among peoples rather than countries, because legal consciousness is an indispensable and unique part of each culture and each civilization. The crisis of the international law that is being spoken about, in a sense, is growing pains, because the fact that peoples and cultures that due to different reasons in the past used to be left in the political sidelines are currently in the ascendant, and it means that their unique perceptions and views and notions of right and justice and law are playing an increasingly significant role in the world. It might seem like there is a lack of coordination and dissonance, but this is just the formative stage, and I'm confident that the world can only be built on the principles of polyphony, with all the themes being woven together in harmony. If you will, we are moving to a polyphonic world rather than a polycentric world, a world in which all the voices have to be heard and, what's most important, listened to. And those who have grown accustomed to playing solo and who wants to continue doing that will have to get used to living in a new world, playing to a new score. I spoke about the international law after the Second World War. The international law is based upon the UN Charter, which was written after the Second World War, but the world is changing. New poles of growth are emerging, powerful economies are growing, getting to the foreground. And of course, international law has to change, but it has to be very cautiously done.
Третье, мы не раз говорили, что новый мир может успешно развиваться только на принципах максимальной представительности. Опыт последних пары десятилетий наглядно продемонстрировал, к чему приводит узурпаторство, чье-то стремление присваивать себе право говорить и действовать других. Те, кого принято называть великими державами, привыкли и приучились считать, что они имеют право определять, в чем
grown accustomed to thinking that they have the right to determine the interests of others. Basically, growing used to dictating
Это не только нарушает принципы демократии и справедливости. Хуже всего, что это, по сути, позволяет реально решать насущные проблемы. Наступающий мир не будет простым или не в силу своего многообразия. Чем больше полноправных участников процесса, тем сложнее, конечно, найти оптимальный устраивающийся вариант. Зато когда он найден, есть надежда, что решение окажется устойчивым и долгосрочным. А еще это означает избавиться, это позволяет избавиться от самодурства и импульсивных шараханий. И, напротив, сделать политические процессы осмысленными и рациональными, руководствуясь принципом разумной достаточности. По большому счету, этот принцип заложен уже право вето — это что такое? Для чего придумано было? Чтобы не проходили решения, которые не устраивают игроков международной арены.
Decisions that the political stakeholders are not happy about do not pass. Is that good or is it bad? Probably not very good, but it creates certain barriers when decisions are to be made. But it's also very good because it prevents decisions from being passed if someone is not happy with them. So it means that you have to get back to the negotiating table and hammer out an agreement. But since the world is becoming multipolar, we have to come up with instruments that will help us expand the use of similar mechanisms in each particular case. A solution has to be not just collective, it also has to involve the participants and the stakeholders that are capable of making a substantive and significant contribution to settling the problem. This involves primarily those who are interested in a positive outcome, because their future security and hence prosperity depend on that. There are numerous examples of cases when conflicts, those solvable disagreements between neighboring nations and peoples, degenerated into intransigent, chronic conflicts due to the scheming and brazen interference of external forces who basically do not care much about what's going to happen to the parties to the conflict, how much blood is going to be spilled, how many lives are going to be claimed. They are simply, those external forces are guided by their own selfish interests without assuming any responsibility. I also believe that regional organizations are going to play a very important role, because however difficult the relationship between neighboring countries, they are always brought together by a common interest in stability and security. Compromises are vital to achieve the best conditions for their own development. Next, a key principle is universal security for everyone without exception, because the security of one cannot be assured at the expense of the security of others. I'm not saying anything new. It's all in the OSCE documents, and it has to be observed. The block-based approach has been bequeathed to us from the colonial times and the Cold War, and it runs counter against the new international system, which is flexible and open. In the world today, only one bloc remains that is brought together by obedience and rigid ideological dogmas, and that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it continues its expansion to the east of Europe, all while trying to project its approaches to other spaces across the world, which is a violation of its founding documents. And this is a blatant anachronism. On many occasions, we've spoken about the destructive role that NATO continued to play, especially after the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Treaty Organization, when seemingly the alliance had lost its formal raison d'etre, which had been declared before. I believe the U.S. understood that this tool was becoming, was losing its attractiveness, as it were, but they still needed it, and they still need that to govern and to manage its zone of influence. So they need conflicts. You know, before all the acute crisis of today, many European leaders were telling me, why are they using you to threaten us? You know, I'm basically quoting them. And I think the US understood that full well. They felt that. They saw NATO as a second-rate organization, but trust me, I know what I'm saying. But the experts over there understood the need for NATO. How do you keep it attractive? You have to scare them good. You have to sow discord between Europe and Russia, especially between Russia and Germany and France, and hence the coup d'etat in Ukraine and the hostilities in the east in Donbass. They basically force us to take actions in response, though they got what they wanted. And the same is happening in Asia, on the Korean Peninsula, I suppose. In practice, we see that the world minority is trying to preserve and reinforce its military bloc there by trying to preserve its power. But even within this bloc itself, there is a noticeable understanding that the strict diktat of the big brother in no ways does nothing to facilitate addressing the tasks at hand. And it also is in stark contrast to the aspirations of other countries of the world, because cooperating when it's beneficial, building partnership with anyone who is interested, that is the evident priority of most countries on our planet. It's evident that military, political, and ideological blocks are yet another type of hurdles built in the way of the natural development of the nascent international system. I would also like to point out that the very notion of a zero-sum game, where only one party stands to win, whereas everyone else stands to lose, has been born out of a Western political thought. And under the Western dominance, this approach was imposed on everyone under the pretext of its universality. But Under no circumstances is that the case. Quite the contrary, the Eastern philosophy, many of you who've gathered here know that, and probably know that firsthand, even better than I do, is based on another approach. And this approach is searching for a harmony of interests when everyone wants to achieve what's most important to them, but not to the detriment of the other party. I win, but you stand to win as well. And Russians win as well in Russia. All the peoples of Russia historically, when that was possible, assumed that it's not the most important thing, trying to push through your opinion by any means possible. Rather, they were trying to convince and get them interested in a fair partnership and equal cooperation, whereas our history and the history of our diplomacy have demonstrated on many occasions that the worth of honor, nobility, peace building and generosity, sufficing to remember Russia's role in rearranging the European order after the Napoleonic Wars. Views it's seen as trying to keep monarchies in power, but I'm not talking about the specifics, I'm talking about the general trends. And the prototype of a new free, non-block, block-free type of cooperation between nations and peoples, that is precisely the association built within BRICS. And this is amply demonstrated by the fact that even within NATO there are those who show interest in working closely with BRICS, and I do not rule out that in the future other countries will also think about cooperating more closely. And this year, our country held chairmanship in BRICS, and as you're aware, we've just recently held the summit in Kazan. I won't hide it, coming up with a coordinated approach among the countries whose interests diverge in many points. Is a tall order. Diplomats and other states, people had to spare no effort and show a lot of tact, demonstrating capacity to listen to one another to obtain the requisite result. It took a lot, but this is how we forged the unique spirit of cooperation, which is based on mutual understanding rather than coercion. And we are confident that BRICS sets a very good example for everyone as a beacon of constructive cooperation in a new international landscape. I would also like to add that within BRICS there are meetings of entrepreneurs, scholars, intellectuals of our countries. This can serve as a platform for a profound philosophical fundamental perception and analysis of the current processes of the world developing with due regard for the characteristics of each and every civilization with their culture, history, identity, and tradition. The spirit of respect and due regard for the interests of one another. This is precisely the basis of the future system of Eurasian security, which is beginning to take shape across our vast continent. And this is not just about a multilateral approach, this is also a multifaceted process, because right now security is a comprehensive notion that encompasses not just the military and political aspect. It's impossible to achieve without ensuring social and economic development of any nations, and also stability against any external challenges, both natural and man-made in the real world and in cyberspace. Fifth, fairness for everyone, because inequality is the true scourge of the modern world. Within nations, inequality breeds social tensions as well as political instability, whereas in the international arena, it is a source of the development gap between the golden billion and the rest of humanity, which is fraught with greater political disagreements and also, most importantly, with worsening migration issues. Almost all developed nations of the planet are facing increasingly less controllable influx of those who want to improve their material circumstances, obtain a high social status, gain better prospects, and sometimes simply to survive. And this migration wave sometimes leads to a surge in xenophobia, intolerance to foreigners, and reaches societies, which sets off the spiral of social and political troubles and increase a greater level of aggression. The fact that some countries are lagging behind in terms of social and economic economic development is a comprehensive phenomenon, and there is no magic wand to conjure this disease away. We need to work in a systemic fashion and long term. We need to create conditions which will remove artificial, politically motivated barriers in the way of development. We have to remove attempts at instrumentalizing economy, at weaponizing it, because whoever is the target, everyone gets hit. And the heaviest blow is against the most vulnerable, the people and countries that need support. We are confident that such issues as food security, energy security, access to healthcare and education, and finally, orderly and free movement of people have to be secured against being held hostage to conflicts and controversies, because these are basic human rights. Six, we highlight emphatically that any sustainable international order can only be based upon the principle of sovereign equality. It's true that each nation has different potential. It's evident, and their capacities are vastly different. That often gives rise to the notion that full equality is impossible, it's utopia, it's illusory, but the characteristic of the modern world, which is so integrated and well connected, is that countries that are not the most powerful or the biggest one sometimes can punch far above their weight, at least due to the fact that they are capable of being more rational and targeted in the use of their human intellectual, natural and environmental potential. They're agile and flexible in addressing complex tasks. They set up the bar in quality of life and ethics, governance efficiency, and building the opportunity for self-fulfillment of each and every person, in building a very favorable psychological atmosphere in society, which is favorable to the development of science, entrepreneurship, arts, creativity, tapping the talents of young people. These translates into the factors of global influence. To paraphrase the days of physics, maybe the force is not that great, but its efficiency is far better. But the most destructive thing today is arrogance and high-handedness, as well as the need to constantly and ceaselessly pontificate. Russia has never been the one to do that, and we see that our approach is productive. Our historical experience shows indisputably that inequality, be that within society, within the state, or in the international arena, will inevitably lead to nefarious consequences. And I would like to add something that I haven't spoken about. Over the many centuries of the Western-centric world, we've seen the emergence of certain cliches and stereotypes, sort of in hierarchy. Allegedly, there is the developed world, progressive humanity, a certain universal civilization that everyone is supposed to aspire to, whereas there are also backward, uncivilized peoples, basically barbarians, and their only mission is to listen unquestioningly to what they're being told and to act at the behest of those who allegedly stand higher than they do on this civilizational ladder. Obviously, this is a cover for a brazen colonial approach aimed at exploiting the world majority. But the thing is, this is a basically racist ideology that has taken root in the consciousness of many people. And this is also a very serious mental hurdle in the way of universal harmonious development. The world today abhors haughtiness, but it doesn't tolerate deafness towards the uniqueness of others. In order to build normal relations, you've got to listen to your interlocutor, you have to understand their logic and cultural background, rather than trying to project on them what you think about them, your own notions. Otherwise, your communication is going to be entirely deaf, labeling and also exchange of stereotypes. We know about unique cultures of different nations. On the surface, everything looks decent, music, the folklore. They've been elevated, but essentially the economic and security policy remains the same. Neo-colonial innocence, just look at how it works, because the Western economies are blocking everything, trying to pursue their own interests. I refer to the WTO example. They're trying to preserve their dominance for decades and centuries. We have to remember that everyone is equal in that everyone is entitled to their vision. No better or no worse than other visions, it's just theirs. And this is the basis for mutual understanding of our interests, as well as respect, empathy, ability to commiserate, to listen to the arguments and points of views of others, and not just to listen, but also to build your policies based on that. Because listening to others does not imply simply agreeing with everything and accepting everything. This is about recognizing the right of your interlocutor to have their own worldview. This is basically the first step in the quest for a harmony in your worldviews, because we have to learn to see diversity and differences as something precious and a source of opportunities rather than conflicts. And this is also about the dialectics of history. We understand you and I that the era of drastic transformations will lead to inevitable clashes of interests and shocks. Everyone is going to get to readjust to one another. And probably this interconnectedness of the world, rather than assuage differences, will exacerbate them, making them more jumbled, and the quest for a solution more difficult. Because over the many centuries of its history, humanity has grown accustomed to viewing the use of force as the last resort for resolving differences. Whoever is more powerful is right. Yes, sometimes this principle does work, and it does happen, and a lot of countries are forced to fend for their interests with up in arms, using all means at their disposal. But the world of today is becoming increasingly complex. But sometimes using force to address one problem will breed another problem, and other problems which are going to be even more grave. And we understand that our country has never been the one to initiate the use of force. We only are forced to do that when it becomes clear that our opponent is acting aggressively and is not willing to listen to any type of argument. And whenever necessary, we will take any measure we need to and have to do to protect Russia and our citizens, and we will always achieve our goals. The world is absolutely non-linear and inherently heterogeneous. We've always understood that. I was not going to take the trip down memory lane, but I remember very well back in 1999 when I stood at the helm of the government, and then I went on to become the head of state. There was something we were facing back then. I think the Russian citizens and the experts who are present here remember that very well as well. We remember the forces behind the terrorists in the Northern Caucasus. We know where from and in what size they were getting money and weapons, moral, political, and ideological support. Sometimes it's laughable, but also very sad to remember those developments, because, Al-Qaeda, it's bad, but when it's fighting against you, then it's all right. And all of that breeds conflict. Back then, we fixed a goal for ourselves to use all the time we have, to spare no effort to preserve our country. And it served the interests of all the peoples of Russia, despite the dire economic straits after the 1998 crisis and the armed forces falling into disrepair. We managed to rise together and repel the attack of the terrorists and went on to rout them. Why did I choose to remind you of that? Because right now there are those who once again come up with the notion that the world without Russia is going to be better off. And they wanted to destroy what was left after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and right now there are those who think that the world is going to be more obedient, is going to be easier to control without Russia. But on multiple occasions, Russia stopped those who sought world domination, whoever that was. And we're going to do that. And the world is not going to be better. And those who do not understand that they have to realize that it's only more difficult. And our opponents are still coming up with new instruments to get rid of us. Right now, they're trying to instrumentalize Ukraine and Ukrainians as such a tool. They are cynically training Ukrainians against Russians, basically turning Ukrainians into cannon fodder. And all of that is accompanied by conversations about a European choice. What kind of choice is that? We don't need that, for sure. We will protect ourselves and our citizens. Let no one labor under any illusion to that end. But of course, this is not the end of Russia's world, dramatic as it may sound, but Russia's very existence is the guarantee that the world is going to preserve its diverse colors, stability, and complexity. This is also safeguard of successful development. And this is not me who is saying that, because our friends from across the world are telling me that. I'm simply repeating them. I would like to reiterate that we're not trying to impose anything on anyone. We're not going to do that. We don't need that. We are guided by our values, interests, and notions of what is right, that have deep roots in our identity, history, and culture. And we're certainly always open to a constructive dialogue with everyone, because whoever has respect for their own culture and tradition will certainly have the same type of respect for other cultures and traditions. Whereas those who are trying to make others behave in an improper manner will inevitably trample their own roots, their civilization and culture. And to a certain extent, this is what we're witnessing today. Today, Russia is fighting for its freedom, for its sovereignty and rights. Without exaggeration, I'm saying that because during the previous decades, on the surface, everything looked so decent because, you know, G7 was turned into G. Thank you, we were invited. But you know what was truly happening? Because I saw that firsthand. Say, you come to the G8, and it becomes clear from the outset that before the G8, the G7 had a separate meeting, and they had some separate conversations, and they had discussed Russia, and then they invite Russia to talk with them. You look at all of this with a smile. That is how I look at it. But in practice, you know, it is a great picture, a great image, the hugs, and, you know, patting on the shoulder. But in practice, they are continuing to move forward on the offensive. You know, the most flagrant example is the expansion of NATO to the east. They had promised they were not going to do that, but it was happening, and the same was happening in the Caucasus, and also it was happening with regard to the ABM system. So on any key issue, they didn't care one bit about our opinion. We saw this creeping intervention, which, without any exaggeration, was aimed at demeaning our country and at best at destroying our country from within and from outside. You see what they did to Ukraine. They intervened basically with their bases. In 2008, the Bucharest decision was made to open the doors to Georgia and Ukraine. Where did that come from? Had there been any difficulties in the world affairs? Yes, we did have had some disputes with Ukraine with regard to the gas prices, but we did manage to arrive at a solution. Why did they need to create conditions for a conflict? Because it was crystal clear what the consequences were going to be, but they didn't stop at that. They were trying to project their influence across our historic territories. They were supporting the regime which had clear pro-fascist tendencies. So it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that and to repeat that. We are not simply fighting for our own freedom and our sovereignty and our rights. We are also fighting for universal rights and freedoms. We are fighting for the chance for every country to develop on the basis of sovereign equality. And this is the mission of our country. And everyone needs to understand there's no use trying to exert pressure on us. But as for coming to an agreement with due regard for the mutual legitimate interests of one another, this is something we've always been ready for. And this is what we've been asking all participants of the international community to do. And if that happens, then the future participants of the Valdai Club, which are still school children, students, PhD candidates, young scholars, and novice experts, and 20 years or so on the eve of the centenary of the UN, will probably talk about something more optimistic and life-reassuring than the subjects and we have to broach today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Спасибо, Владимир Владимирович, за такое обширное, объемное описание и мира, и российских взглядов на него. Нам, конечно, особенно приятно, что и в прошлом году вы изложили основные принципы именно у нас, а в этот раз их развили. Мне кажется, это уже начинает тянуть на такую доктрину. Валдай, конечно, не претендует на то, чтобы ее назвали нашим именем, но приятно, что здесь она рождается. Владимир Владимирович, мы многие темы, которые вы затронули, обсуждали, конечно, на этой 21-й конференции, и я хотел бы поделиться с вами, мы хотели бы все поделиться некоторыми умозаключениями, которые не на всех, конечно, сессиях, потому что их очень много было, тем не менее, на тех, которые нам показались наиболее важными, это тоже темы, которые вы упоминали. Я хотел бы попросить начать нашего давнего участника, коллегу и вам хорошо известного Руслана Юнусова. Он у нас участвовал в сессии про, извините, искусственный интеллект.
The most fashionable
Добрый вечер, Владимир Владимирович.
Good evening, Mr.
Действительно,
President.
мы обсуждали то, что вы затронули в сегодняшней речи, тему искусственного интеллекта. Была отдельная сессия на нашей конференции, она называлась «Искусственный интеллект. Революция или мода». Но прежде чем я перейду к результатам этой сессии, я бы подчеркнул такой уникальный факт, который в этом году произошел. Сразу две Нобелевские премии были выданы за достижения в искусственном интеллекте. Это премия по физике и по химии. Одновременно такого никогда не было. И подчеркивает ли это, что происходит революция в области искусственного интеллекта? Наверное, скорее да, чем нет. Хотя Нобелевский комитет частенько руководствуется и модой принятия своих решений. Но переходя к тематике уже нашей дискуссии, валдайской дискуссии, я подчеркну несколько аспектов, которые мы обсудили. Начали мы с того вопроса, который многих беспокоит. А вот придет искусственный интеллект и заменит он человека? Или нет. И особенно в тех областях, где требуется творческий подход, например, наука, искусство. И что мы видим в науке сегодня? Действительно, искусственный интеллект уже вошел в научный процесс. Многие достижения достигнуты благодаря и с помощью искусственного интеллекта. Но при этом мы также видим одновременно, что вытеснение человека не происходит из научного процесса. Скорее, сам прогресс ускоряется, а новые кадры, квалифицированные молодые ребята нужны еще больше. Так что здесь пока мы риска не видим. Также мы обсудили аспекты экономики и искусственного интеллекта. В свое время, во время ковида, в 2020 год примерно, были ожидания, что выход из мировой рецессии будет обеспечен в первую очередь за счет драйвера, такого драйвера, как искусственный интеллект. Вот мы обсуждали, сбылись ли предсказания или нет. Да, конечно, искусственный интеллект уже начал внедряться в экономику, в разные сектора экономики. Но если посмотреть на цифры, то окажется, что те самые оптимистичные ожидания, не сбылись. Получилось немного более консервативно. И более того, эти ожидания продолжают быть сегодня. И мы видим формирование пузырей на инвестиционном рынке, что грозит в будущем отрицательными экономическими эффектами. Хотя сам по себе искусственный интеллект как технология, похоже, будет и дальше развиваться и будет основой экономики. Опять же, мы обсуждали вопросы безопасности. Сегодня нельзя не отметить, что террористические, экстремистские организации вовсю используют технологии искусственного интеллекта при вербовке новых членов или в более широких аспектах пропаганды. Фейковые новости, видео, они являются сейчас стандартным инструментом таких группировок. Но, с другой стороны, существует и использование искусственного интеллекта в контртеррористической, в контрэкстремистской деятельности, когда можно выявлять эти самые экстремистские элементы в обществе, но более того, можно влиять на сомневающуюся часть общества и отвратить ее от этих шагов, чтобы она не переходила на сторону экстремизма. Это тоже работает. Когда мы обсуждали, каков баланс, что больше, позитива или негатива, похоже, что позитивных явлений искусственного интеллекта в области безопасности все-таки больше, и хотелось бы, чтобы и дальше этот баланс был в стороне позитива. Ну и, конечно же, на Валдайском форуме нельзя не обсудить политические вопросы искусственного интеллекта. И вот были исследования, которые показали, когда исследователи провели основные модели искусственного интеллекта, генеративные модели, через тестирование на политические взгляды, оказалось, что искусственный интеллект не является нейтральным. Не является нейтральным. У него сильно перекошены политические взгляды в сторону леволиберализма и во многом связаны с взглядами их создателей. И более того, в последние пару лет мы видим, что обучение искусственного интеллекта идет с помощью синтетических данных больше, чем из фактического реального материала. И это также способствует тому, что взгляды этих моделей будут более радикальными. В ближайшие пару лет мы получим первых выпускников вузов, которые в своей деятельности используют, в обучении используют искусственный интеллект. Вот раньше, если мы брали курсовые рефераты, то ребята относились к первоисточникам, осмысляли их, проводили работу. Сейчас можно просто сделать запрос искусственному интеллекту, и тебе будет готов результат. Понятно, что качество обучения упадет. Но гораздо опаснее, на наш взгляд, такое исподволь влияние, которое оказывает искусственный интеллект, формируя мировоззрение молодых ребят, внедряя идеологию в их голову, причем эта идеология формируется во многом не в нашей стране, а за рубежом или даже за океаном. И здесь, как вывод, мы, конечно, понимаем, что необходимо усиливать контроль, регулирование искусственного интеллекта, но при этом, если руководствоваться запретительными мерами, похоже, результата не добиться. Скорее нужно поддерживать и развивать отечественные технологии искусственного интеллекта. Хорошо, что у нас сегодня большой задел сформирован, и большой прогресс мы видим существует. Надо его дальше продолжать, и это, наверное, будет основой технологического суверенитета в этой области. Здесь надо отметить, что Россия является одной из 3 стран в мире, у кого есть полный спектр IT-технологий, и это действительно основа суверенитета. Ну и завершая такой мой доклад короткий, наши гости иностранные отмечали, что в некоторых странах уже сегодня есть ограничения, даже полный запрет на использование технологий искусственного интеллекта. Для нас, для России, это скорее возможность. Мы можем проявить себя как технологический лидер, показать себя в этой роли, экспортируя технологии искусственного интеллекта в наши страны-партнеры. Спасибо большое.
Ну, если позволите, я 2 слова тоже скажу. Первое, конечно, искусственный интеллект – это важнейший инструмент развития. Один из наших приоритетов, конечно, в сфере экономики, но не только, и в других областях, использование больших данных, это развитие искусственного интеллекта. С учетом того, что у нас большой дефицит, безработица минимальная, 2,4%, это дефицит рабочей силы. И в будущем, конечно, видим решение этих проблем в сфере экономики на пути развития современных технологий, из которых использование искусственного интеллекта одно из главнейших, важнейших направлений. Чего здесь больше? Плюсов или минусов?
Are there more positive things or negative things? What about nuclear energy? Is it more beneficial or not? The use of peace atoms in agriculture, in healthcare, in transportation.
Огромную, важнейшую роль играет. It plays a tremendous role, and it will only increase, I'm sure of it, especially considering the climate change issues presented by it. Still, we have nuclear weapons. On the other hand, it creates great risks for humanity. The same applies to artificial intelligence. It's a matter of regulation and the way people use it. As for regulation, yes, many countries have the regulation, and some even have bans in place. I think it's impossible to ban it. It will still find its way through, especially in the conditions of competition, and ever-increasing one. I'm not talking about armed confrontation, but indeed, there is greater competition in economy. Amid competition, it's unavoidable that the artificial intelligence would be developing. And here we could be one of the leaders. I mean, certain advantages that we have in place.
Что касается суверенитета, важнейшая составляющая, конечно, платформы, чаще всего формируются за рубежом, и они формируют мировоззрение, совершенно верно. Здесь мы должны понимать это и развивать свой суверенный искусственный интеллект. Конечно, нужно пользоваться всем, что есть, но нужно развивать и свои направления. Сбер, Яндекс над этим работают, и в целом работают весьма успешно. Вот мы и, безусловно, будем это все делать, без всяких сомнений, особенно там, где он уже сам себя воспроизводит. Это очень интересно и очень перспективно. Но здесь есть и свои угрозы, конечно. Мы должны видеть, понимать эти угрозы и соответствующим образом выстраивать свою работу. Но, как я уже сказал, это одно из важнейших направлений нашей совместной деятельности. Нашей, когда я говорю нашей, имею в виду и государства, и специалистов в этой области, и все общество. Потому что здесь, конечно, возникает очень много морально-нравственных вопросов. Обязательно на это нужно обращать внимание. Вот вы сказали, что взгляды радикальные формируются и так далее. Да, мы своевременно просто должны этому противопоставить свое мировоззрение, свою точку зрения на все процессы, которые и у нас в обществе происходят, и этим вместе будем заниматься. Вам спасибо, что вы обратили на это внимание.
Thank you so much. We'll continue to analyze what's happening. Yes, you must. Indeed, the AI in Russia should be taught by Russian data to reflect our culture. Absolutely so. And we have such an opportunity. Absolutely, it's apparent.
Уверен, что у нас все очень все получится, и это принесет нам такую огромную, будет хорошая поддержка в нашем развитии.
Владимир Владимирович, а суверенный искусственный интеллект, когда у нас будет, он нам сможет русскую идею для 21 века предложить?
Он может только помочь решать те задачи, которые перед нами стоят. Очень важно, как мы их формулируем.
Спасибо.
Да, поскольку там он работает тоже с большими данными, но у нас есть все возможности, и интеллектуальные возможности, и технологические, и большое количество свободной энергии. Здесь есть над чем нам вместе поработать. И я думаю, что такими вопросами, как вы сейчас сказали, философскими, фундаментальными, надо все привлекать. А наше уже дело с вами верить этому или не верить, когда мы получаем результаты исследований, основанных на современных принципах и с использованием, в том числе, искусственного интеллекта.
Спасибо. Смежная тема, конечно, у нас обсуждалась, где искусственный интеллект и цифровизация, там и информация, все то, что с ней сейчас происходит. Происходит очень много тоже, и плюсы, и минусы во всем. Наш индийский коллега Арвин Гупта участвовал в этой сессии. Прошу вас.
Thank you. My name is Arvind Gupta, Mr. President, and I come from India. I work on the intersection of technology and society and building digital public infrastructure for population-scale problems. Thank you, Mr. President. You've already addressed some of the issues that my colleague Ruslan here talked about on AI, but I thank you for listening to our summary, and our expert panels discussed the issue of something which is adjacent to AI, and I will, in the end, mention that, of information manipulation, surveillance using technology and data, and the lack of transparency in all technology systems today. Mr. President, the group discussed that the internet was designed about 45 years ago to be a global public good. Unfortunately, now, like many other things, it's become very unipolar. It's controlled by a few big tech firms with their own ideological leanings. And some of these platforms or big tech firms are not allowed to operate in countries like India, Russia, Indonesia, and many others for their roles in manipulation and surveillance. The second issue we discussed, Mr. President, was the algorithms that, that we discussed previously in the AI session also, really define how we think. The AI is actually becoming a new buzzword today, but the algorithms have been around for a long time, and they really define how we think, how we consume, how we elect our governments. And as all of us have agreed, they have a leaning towards an ideology and definitely are not neutral. So the algorithms themselves are biased. The other thing the group discussed was the whole weaponization of information and data. And that, coupled with the biased technology platforms, are giving certain nation states massive power, and it's influencing national security, democracy, and the public order in general. So, Mr. President, you are aware that this has been the form of Western technology platforms, but India presented an alternate model during its G20 presidency to this Western technology platforms. It's a platform which takes society into account. It's a bottom-up platform built around identity, a universal identity system, a universal payment system. It's actually used by more than 1 billion people, and in India, and more than 20 other countries use it. This is to present that how India has created a different vision for technology from the Western vision that exists today. Mr. President, I must commend Russia for succeeding making the Mir platform very successful in Russia in a very, very short time, and that also shows the power of technological sovereignty that was just mentioned, that it can be done if the desire is there. Mr. President, the issue that you just discussed, I progress with this biasness of technology and technology platforms and the non-neutral nature with what is coming head-on to us, the artificial intelligence era. Given that we let a few big companies control the internet, how do we ensure that our culture, our society, our national interests are going to be protected in this whole era of artificial intelligence? What kind of guardrails do we need to build from the start to have fair and responsible AI? How do we ensure that like-minded states work together for non-weaponization of AI, for non-weaponization of artificial intelligence? And lastly, Mr. President, we would like to hear from you, how do we build trust in the information that we see in news and technology at large? And that was one of the most defining things that the group debated, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Очень важная тема.
This is a very important subject,
конечно, и предыдущему вопросу
and
искусственному
it's
интеллекту, его
related
использованию,
to the
развитию.
previous issue, AI, its development
Здесь несколько
and
аспектов. Во-первых,
use. And there are several aspects to this matter.
использование
To start
интернета,
with, the
конечно,
use
должно быть
of
основано на
the internet
суверенных
should
алгоритмах.
certainly
К
be
этому надо стремиться.
founded upon sovereign algorithms. This is
Первое.
something we
Второе,
have to
Нам
aspire
очень
to.
сложно со
Secondly,
стороны государства, то есть можно,
on
но
the part of the government,
это будет
it
отчасти
it's very
контрпродуктивно,
difficult. It's
все
possible, but
запрещать.
it's going to be
Именно
counterproductive
со
if
стороны
we try to
государства.
prohibit
Вот в
everything,
России
you know,
профессиональное
if the
сообщество
government chooses this
пришло к
path.
необходимости и
In Russia,
приняло
the
решение
professional
о правилах
community has arrived at
ведения этого бизнеса.
an understanding on the rules
Интернета
for
как
doing the
бизнес.
business
И
in the internet.
взяло на себя
And
определенные
this professional
самостоятельные
community has
самоограничения,
assumed
особенно
several
связанные с какой-то
independently developed
возможным деструктивным
self-restrictions,
влиянием на
trying to
на
prevent
общество.
any
В
destructive
целом,
influence
особенно на
upon
детскую
society,
аудиторию.
especially on
И мне кажется,
young audiences.
что это вот
And I think this
один из способов
kind of self-regulation is
обеспечить
one
интересы
of the
большинства людей
views.
и общества в целом.
It's one of the ways to ensure
конечно,
the interests of
интернет должен подчиняться
the
внутреннему
majority. But of
законодательству
course,
той
the
страны,
internet has to comply
где
with
идет работа
domestic
с
legislation
защитой
of the country it's being operated in.
Значит,
It's evident.
то, что мы видим,
That said,
манипуляция
we are
информацией,
witnessing
да, к сожалению, это
manipulation
происходит.
of
Но, повторяю
information.
еще раз,
Unfortunately, this does happen. But I would like
деятельность
to
интернета будет
reiterate,
подчинена и
if
поставлена под внутренние
the
законы
internet
и должна быть
complies with domestic legislation,
подчинена внутреннему законодательству, то
and it should be the
мы
case,
таким образом
then this
минимизируем
will
возможные
allow us
негативные
to
последствия. Я понимаю, что
minimize
есть технологические
potential
ограничения,
negative consequences.
технологические
I do
сложности
understand
для
the
того, чтобы все это
technological
реализовать. Но
difficulties and restrictions.
если встать
It's
на
going to
путь
be a
вот
tall
этого
order, but if we
работы,
choose
связанной
this
с самим профессиональным сообществом,
of
которое
engaging with
видит
the professional community,
возможность
that
создания
sees
угроз для общества,
where the
оно
threats might be
самостоятельно
coming
и
from for
работает
society,
над купированием
then
этих
it's going to
угроз.
be a
Поэтому
way for the professional community
государство,
to
конечно,
address those
должно
threats
быть рядышком.
on its own. But
Для
of course, the
таких стран,
government should
как
be willing
Индия,
to
как Россия,
lend a helping hand.
эта задача
For
вполне
such countries
решаема,
as
потому
Russia and
что
India,
у
this
нас с вами
is a
очень
task that can
хорошие
be addressed.
специалисты,
We
очень
have
хорошие
very good,
математические школы,
top-notch
и есть люди,
specialists
которые
and experts. We've got very good schools of
уже
mathematics.
сами
We've got
являются лидерами,
people
если не их
who
компания, то
have
они сами
proven to be
точно
leaders
совершенно
in this field.
являются
Well,
лидерами в
even
этой
if their
сфере
companies are not yet
деятельности.
leaders, they themselves, as experts,
Здесь
have raised to prominence in the
у нас
field.
все карты в руках.
So
Особенно,
we've got
повторяю еще раз,
everything we
в
need,
такой стране, как Индия или
especially in
Россия.
such countries as India
Значит, что
and
касается
Russia.
платежной системы
Now,
МИР,
as for the MIR
то
payment
да,
system that you
это
have
в известной степени
mentioned,
успех, она работает,
to an
работает
extent,
хорошо,
it's been a
уверенно,
success, it's working,
работала
it's
бы еще
functioning,
лучше,
it could function even
еще
better,
шире, если бы
and
не
it could
создавали
be
искусственных
expanded
для
if there had
ее
been
развития.
no
Но даже несмотря
artificial
на то, что
barriers
эти
put in the
препятствия
way.
создаются,
But even
она
though these
развивается,
barriers
и
are
мы
being
будем
built, MIR
тиражировать
payment
успех
system
подобного.
is developing, and we're going to
Эта тема,
replicate
тема интернета,
the
она вечная,
success.
но она
The issue of the
уже
internet,
стала вечной.
you know, it's
Вы сказали,
as
что
it
она
has
создавалась
become
как
a permanent
для
fixture
того,
of our
чтобы
discussions. You said
она
that
была
the
использована в
internet
интересах
was created as a public good to
человечества.
serve
Ну,
the
она создавалась,
benefit
конечно, для
of
других целей.
humanity.
Но в
Well, of course,
какой-то
it
момент,
was built for other purposes
конечно, ее
in the very
предназначение
beginning, but at a
категорическим
certain
образом
point
изменилось.
in time,
Да, и
its
нужно, чтобы
goals
деятельность в интернете, так же,
changed.
как любая